Mount Rushmore is one of America's most easily recognizable landmarks. It ranks up there with the Statue of Liberty and the Golden Gate Bridge as one of the most famous sites in the U.S. It's situated in cozy South Dakota and features the faces of 4 American presidents carved into a mountain. We can easily imagine how a bridge or statue might be constructed, but how on earth was Mount Rushmore created? How were the presidents' faces so clearly carved into a massive granite mountain? And just as importantly, why was it constructed in the first place? First of all, let's look at Mount Rushmore as it is today. It stands on the southwest of South Dakota in the Black Hills. Black Hills is regarded as a sacred site to several Native American tribes, especially the Lakota and the Dakota people. Mount Rushmore features the faces of 4 prominent U.S. presidents: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt. Work began on the construction in 1927 and was officially finished in 1941. The mountain itself is over 1,700 meters high. It's estimated that the heads on the memorial are almost 20 meters high, with each of the eyes of the presidents being around 3 meters wide. Mount Rushmore hosts approximately 2 million visitors per year, making it one of America's most visited tourist destinations. The fact that the mountain is located in one of the most remote parts of the U.S., yet attracts so many guests, says a lot about its tourist appeal. So why was it constructed in the first place, and whose idea was it? Back in 1923, a South Dakota historian called Doane Robinson suggested creating a monument with the likenesses of the Native American Old West personalities. Robinson proposed that it was in the Custer State Park that he built, which was traditionally a sacred tribal site. The names suggested including Red Cloud, Lewis and Clark, and Buffalo Bill. Robinson's main aim was to attract more visitors to South Dakota. It only became a state some 34 years earlier in 1889. Robinson contacted a well-known and well-respected sculptor, Gutzon Borglum. Borglum had gained fame with several previous works, including figures for the New York Cathedral and the sculpture of Lincoln's head for the White House. At the time, Borglum was already working on an ambitious project to carve the faces of Civil War Confederate leaders into a mountain in Georgia. Someone with the know-how to sculpt detailed figures into cliff faces was exactly what Robinson was looking for. And Borglum was constantly feuding with those who had commissioned his ongoing carvings, so yeah, he wanted to sculpt an entire army, whereas the organizers had limited funds. So, when Borglum was contacted by Robinson, he agreed to meet in South Dakota to discuss this new project. Borglum was a headstrong character who believed that he knew best. If things weren't done the way that he saw fit, then they weren't worth doing. It was no surprise, then, that when he met Robinson, there were a few differences of opinion. Borglum inspected the proposed Custer Valley mountain site and immediately rejected it, saying that the rock was too brittle and it would be unsuitable for such a project. He did, however, like Robinson's idea of creating something on a grand scale that would last well into the future, and started searching for a location. A state forester took Borglum to the Black Hills region and showed him Mount Rushmore. Borglum was instantly taken with the size, the scope of the mountain, and decided that this was indeed the spot. When he saw the 120-meter high, 150-meter wide granite wall, he immediately envisioned the perfect canvas on which to create his monument. However, while Robinson's idea had been to create a memorial dedicated to the people from the Old West, Borglum wanted to make something that would represent America's greatness. He believed Robinson's idea to carve the faces of famous figures from the Old West was too regional. Instead, he wanted to do something that would appeal to all Americans. He decided to create a monument displaying who he believed were the most important American presidents. Washington's representation was a depiction of America's foundation. Jefferson, the country's great expansion. Lincoln was to represent preserving America through the Civil War, and then Roosevelt for America's development into a global power. Borglum was fiercely patriotic. He said that he wanted Americans to come and see it, become inspired, and go home and be better citizens. First of all, though, they had to secure Mount Rushmore as a project site. It was on federal land, which meant some persuasive lobbying from local politicians, congressmen, and a state senator. The next step was getting approval from a team of geologists. The geologists agreed with Borglum that the granite was not only highly durable, but the light outside the surface would be ideal for carving into. It was thus given the green light, and work began in 1927. Initially, Mount Rushmore was to be funded by private donations. Then President Coolidge was invited to inspect the project, and he was so blown away that he agreed to help fund the project. The U.S. government passed a bill to contribute half the costs, which was an estimated $250,000. From the beginning of its construction, around 30 men worked on Rushmore at any given time. When it was completed in 1941, over 400 men had worked on it. So, how exactly did they carve such intricate details into the granite? Borglum's plan was simple. Blow it up. Dynamite. Specific pieces of granite were removed from the mountain face by using sticks of dynamite. This method was so effective that an amazing 90% of the mountain was carved with dynamite. And here's how it worked. First of all, Borglum made a model of the four faces posing exactly how he wanted them to appear on the mountain. Workers then took measurements of various facial parts and went back to the mountain, this time multiplying the measurements by 12. They marked off the specific area within red paint, such as part of Washington's mouth or Lincoln's nose. Then holes were drilled into the red painted areas, and dynamite was inserted and exploded. This method required extraordinary skill from these workers who were called powdermen. They not only had to accurately translate dimensions from the model to the mountain, they had to know how much dynamite was required for each area. Dynamite was used until there was only a few inches left until the final carved surface. At this stage, drillers and assistant carvers were called in. These workers would use jackhammers to drill small holes next to each other. These caused the granite to weaken, and the final pieces could then be removed by hand. Finally, the buffing workers then went to work. Using a rotating buffing drill, they'd buff the president's skin until there was a smooth, clear surface. The entire operation depended on the tightly run team of various workers that had very specific roles. First up were the powdermen, drillers, and carvers, who did the actual carving into the mountain. They were raised and lowered by being strapped into chairs that were supported by winches. This required winch operators, who then had to be carefully lowering the carvers by hand. Call boys were employed to direct the winch operators. They were positioned so that they could see where the carvers had to go and shouted out directions to the winchmen. Then there were blacksmiths, who forged the drills and carving tools, and then the tramway operators, who looked after the transporting of tools from the mountain base to the carving area. In a project that was often dangerous, it's incredible and a testament to those involved that there were no fatalities. Now, this isn't to say that everything went smoothly. Along the way, there were several stoppages and delays in construction. A major delay occurred when workers had to move Thomas Jefferson's face. He was supposed to be on the left of George Washington, but the rock to that side was unsuitable for the details required for Jefferson's face. Workers had to blast him off the mountain and start all over again on the other side. Funding was another issue, as the final cost came to around $1 million, 4 times the original estimate. And as much as it's admired, Mount Rushmore has not been without its critics. From the outset, Native American groups opposed the monument, claiming it was on sacred Lakota land. In response to the Rushmore carvings, the Lakota chief hired a sculptor in the 1930s to create a monument dedicated to the famous leader, Crazy Horse. The Crazy Horse Memorial is still being completed, and it lies about 25 kilometers away from Mount Rushmore. It's much larger than the Mount Rushmore carvings, and it's ranked as the world's 8th biggest mountain carving. Whatever people may think of the Rushmore Monument, the magnificent craftsmanship and thoroughness of those involved just has to be admired on some level, you know? Even today, such a project will be wildly ambitious. For it to be completed without the use of modern-day technology and machinery makes it even more impressive. Borglum demanded excellence, my man, and he got it. He got it.